What's up everybody, welcome back. So in this video I wanted to have a look at our crosshair and make it an interactive crosshair that increases size while we are shooting. So we're gonna link it up to our recoil values so it actually makes a little bit of sense how big it is. So first of all we need to make some adjustments to our HUD. So I'm gonna open our in-game HUD widget and I'm gonna replace this crosshair. So if I'm gonna scale this up, this is going to look bad. It's going to stretch the image and that's not what we want. So I'm gonna make a new crosshair and I'm gonna do it as following. So let's get rid of the old one. And let's look for a canvas panel. I'm gonna drag a new canvas panel on top of the existing one. And I'm gonna rename this crosshair. I'm gonna make it a variable up here, so make sure you enable is variable and then scroll all the way to the top. Let's anchor it to the center of the screen. Let's position it at the center. I'm gonna make it 30 by 30 and the alignment is gonna be 0.5, 0.5, so it's actually centered. There we have it. And now if we go back to the top, we're going to select an image and drag it on top of our crosshair canvas panel and select the image over here. I'm gonna make it a size 10 by 2.5 and you see it's horizontal now, so I'm gonna anchor it to the left side of the canvas panel and then I'm gonna position it 0, 0 and 0 out the y-axis, I think 0.5. So it's actually aligned to the center of our canvas panel over here. Now I'm gonna rename this crosshair image. This doesn't need to be a variable, so I'm gonna disable it over here and I'm gonna duplicate it. So let's make this one anchor to the right side of our canvas panel. So anchor it to the right and 0 it out. 10 by 2.5, that's fine, but this time we need to align the X value at 1, so it's aligned to the left side. So there we have the second image, and I'm gonna copy it again, and this time I'm gonna switch around the size, so it's gonna be 2.5 by 10, and I'm gonna anchor it to the top and 0 it out again. So let's see, this needs to be 0.5 and this needs to be 0. And for the last one, duplicate it again and anchor it to the bottom of our canvas panel and 0 it out. So this should be 1 and there we have it. Now I probably should have made these red before I duplicated them. Well, I can select all of them at the same time and I'm gonna change the tint over here. Let's make them red. So there we have our new crosshair. So if I select the canvas panel over here and I can increase the scale and it will oh no, that doesn't work obviously, but I can increase the size. And if I increase the size, it will not affect the images inside, so it will not stretch my crosshair image. So that's why we created this. So let's set them back to 3030, the default size. And I'm gonna compile and save this and go to the graph. So first of all, on event construct, we want to store some values. So event construct, I'm gonna drag in my crosshair and I'm gonna get it as a canvas panel slot. So get as slot, get as canvas, let me see, slot as canvas slot. Okay, if you search for canvas it'll pop up, so select this one, and if we have this we can get the size from it, so get size. And we are going to store this, so drag off it and promote it to a variable, and this is going to be our crosshair size default. And I'm going to connect it up to the event construct, and then I'm going to duplicate the default variable and call this crosshair size current. And I'm also going to drag it in and set it to the same value because the current size at the start of the game is the default size. So we have both of these values set up. And now I also need to create a variable in here, and that's going to be our Crosshair Multiplier. And that's going to be a float. And make sure we compile and save this. And now we need to go into our animation graph and do some work over there. So in the animation folder, open your animation blueprint and go to the event graph. Now we want to pick one of our recoil values, and you probably want to pick the roll one because that's going to be the one that affects the aim most in most cases. But you generally want to pick the one you have the highest values in. So I'm going to use my recoil roll value. And at the end of the blueprint update animation sequence, the execution over here, I am going to connect this up. So if I drag over here, let me see how we're going to do this. Let me drag in a new getter so that makes it a little bit cleaner. So I'm going to get my current recoil and I'm going to split the struct pin over here. And then I'm going to split the rotation again so we have access to the roll. Now this could be a negative or a positive value and we don't want that. So I'm going to drag off here and do absolute. So this is going to turn minus 0.5 into 0.5 for example. So this is going to make it a positive value. And after that I want to normalize it to a range. So normalize to range, a float. And I want to normalize it from, let's say, well, what do we want? We could use something like 0 to 1. It doesn't really matter. We just want it normalized to a range. So let's normalize it from 0 to 1. That should work fine. And we want to get our HUD in here. So drag off the character and do get in-game HUD. And from the in-game HUD, we want to drag off and set our Crosshair Multiplier. So the variable we just created, and we're going to set it to this value over here. And make sure we connect it up to the last execution pin of our event blueprint update animation. So that's where we decrease the recoil back to 0 again from the false pin. And then we're going to drag it off from the recoil setter. So this should work. Compile and save this. So now we have a multiplier in our HUD value, in our HUD blueprint that we're going to use. And first of all, we're going to check if this multiplier is 0 or not. So if it's 0, we don't need to do anything. So let's drag in the Crosshair Multiplier. Let's see if it's not equal to 0. And if it's not equal to 0, we're gonna use it, but we need a third variable for the size. So I'm gonna duplicate the crosshair size current, and I'm gonna call this crosshair size target. I'm gonna drag in a setter for this, and I'm gonna split the struct pin. And now I want to get a lerp node, so I'm gonna right click and do lerp, and I want to lerp a float. So over here, float lerp. And over here we can plug in an alpha. So what this is going to do, this is going to normalize it back from the alpha into the range we specify over here. So what you want to do for the minimum value is plug in the default size of your crosshair. So you could drag in your crosshair default and split it and just plug in one of these values. And for the target size, that's going to change. So you really need to look at it per gun. And the reason for this is because if you change your interpolation speed from the recoil for a weapon, or if you change your recoil values, you're going to end up with different results. So there's not really a set value for this. You're going to have to play around and see what value works for which gun and for which recoil values. So I'm going to start by saying something like 250 is going to be the maximum size of our crosshair. And if we plug in the multiplier, this is going to determine where it's going to be inside this range. So we can simply plug in that into the X and the Y scale vector and connect them up to the true pin over here. So that's the size our crosshair needs to be. So we're going to interpolate to it again. So we're going to look for the interp to, and we want to interp a vector 2D. So vector 2D interp to, and we want to interp from the current size to our target size. We need the delta time in here, and we can get it from the event tick, so plug that in. And for the interp speed, I'm gonna set it to something like 10, but again, you can play around with this, and if you play around with that value, your maximum value or minimum value is gonna change over here. So you really need to adjust everything manually to make everything fit. So after this, we can set the current size to our interpolated value. So drag it in and plug it in like this. And then we actually want to set it. So we're going to drag in our crosshair over here, and we're going to get the canvas slot again. So look for canvas slot as canvas slot. And this time we're going to set the size. So set size. And we can simply plug these in. So that's going to be the current size. Excuse me, the current size that we interpolated to. So we can drag that in over here. So this increased our crosshair, and after that we want to make sure it goes back to 0 again. So we want to check if we need to do anything for that. Add a branch over here and check if the current size happens to be our default size or not. So equal to, and we're going to use the normal equal to with the tolerance, but we can leave it as is, and we're gonna plug in the default size over here, plug it into the condition. So if this is false, we need to interpolate it back to 0. So we're going to get the vector 2D interp to again and paste it over here. And we're gonna interpolate from our current size back to our default size. So current back to default, and store the value in the current value. So this needs to be connected up to the false pin over here. And then we simply need to set the size again, so we can copy this bit and paste it at the end over here. And I think we should be good to go. We need to plug in the delta time for the second interp node, so that works. And I'm going to reduce the interpolation speed a little bit so it centers a little bit slower than it expands. And now I think this should work. So if we compile and save this, let's check it out. So as you can see, if I'm firing, my crosshair increases, and it's increasing to a maximum size. It's increasing a bit too fast probably, so we want to adjust that maybe and go back in here. So we don't want it to be that big, so let's say 175 maybe as a maximum size. And I'm gonna make it interpolate a little bit slower, so I'm gonna say interp speed 7 maybe, and then for the center interpolation I'm gonna say 5. Let's see if that's better. Yeah, that looks a bit better. So there we have it. We have a crosshair that's increasing by the size of our recoil. So if we tap, it stays smaller, and if we keep the fire button pressed, it expands to a maximum size. So as I said, you would need to configure the settings manually to make it match. but as you can see, it's working. Now, one thing you might want to do, and that's just a little bonus, is you can add a function to hide your crosshair. So I'm gonna create a new function and I'm gonna call it toggle crosshair. And let's give it an input, and that's going to be crosshair visible. Drag off from here and plug it into a boolean. So if it's visible, I'm going to drag it in and set visibility, and simply paste it twice. So if it's not visible, I'm gonna hide it, and if it's visible, I'm gonna set it to visible, and then simply return. So if we go into our first person character right now, and we look for our ADS function, which is over here. So if we have our aim button pressed and we are fully ADS'd, so that's when this branch returns true, we are going to hide our crosshair. So let's drag in the in-game HUD and simply say toggle crosshair. And it's not going to be visible, so I'm going to set it to false. And when I release my aim button, I want to show the crosshair immediately, so I'm going to paste that in at the beginning of this function over here, and I'm going to set it back to true. Compile and save. So now if I ADS, my crosshair will disappear. So there we have our crosshair set up. Pretty short video, but I thought it was worth the effort, so I hope you guys liked it. Thanks for watching. Talk to you later. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you liked the video or you think you might have learned something, please consider leaving a like. I'll be back for more.